Audio can be a fickle mistress, and when you're in church media, it can really go awesome, or it can really give you lots of headaches and cause huge distractions and be like the worst thing in the world and make you want to quit and give up and just go crawl in a hole somewhere. So today we're going to be talking about 4 of the biggest mistakes that most of us have been making with audio and some ways to work around it. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Dave Curley. I am a church media creator, and with me, as always, is the lovely, talented, less facially haired Curtis James.
Yes, I am here. I know that I may glitch out on you guys a little bit. It's having some internet issues, but we'll fight through this one.
Oh, it's going to be okay. We have good audio, I believe. I haven't heard any complaints in the chat, which is awesome. So, by the way, if this is your first time joining us, which I know we just had one person in the chat say this was their first time, so welcome if you're new. And this is a place where we help you to leverage technology to amplify the gospel and inspire change in people's lives, like a personal relationship with Christ, which could probably be the best change that anyone could ever have. So that's what we do as church media creators. That's what God has called us to do in the technical ministry that he's put in us. And that's what he's called Curtis and I do, which is to help you guys do the same. So, Curtis, you have been in church media and specifically on the audio side, both as a performer or worship leader and on the technical side for like most of your adult career. So I'm sure you have seen some crazy. I remember you telling me a story about you were in Spain and it was in the middle of a concert and you were performing and mixing and there was a fire or something. What? Share that with the kids at home.
Well, yeah. So back when the Olympics were in Barcelona, I was actually there with a team of people, and we'd been there for several weeks. And had been performing, but we'd had some pretty serious audio problems. Even though I was a performer, they'd asked me to take over the audio system as well. And so what happened to us was our equipment just was, from day one, started breaking down on the trip. We lost the main amplifier in the first concert, and it was just a cascade effect from there. How audio usually goes out. It doesn't usually go out all at once. It's usually cascade failure. And so we actually, big show at the very end. I got this equipment that you just couldn't trust, and my team was setting up, and we had a very specific rule, and that is nobody plugs into power except for me, because we had to use converters. And I look over, and there's smoke coming out from the soundboard because someone had decided to be helpful and plugged it straight into the wall. And we ended up having to power everything down, power it back up. Believe it or not, we actually did get through the show, but we did figure out after the show began that compressors on the board were completely shot, and so it would power down if it didn't get compressed, and so we had to be human compressors the whole time. So it was pretty wild, really. It was quite a trip. It was actually on international TV and everything.
That's awesome.
Great pressure.
I'm glad you didn't burn down the Barcelona Olympics. So, I mean, that there's something to be said for that, right?
We were actually in the Palau Opera House, which is a world-renowned opera house.
Oh, good. Probably has huge history.
Oh man, it's the one that has the famous stained glass window that looks like a drop of water. It's like 80 feet wide, and it drops down like 15 feet. It's incredible. Yeah, we could have ruined, a historic monument older than the United States by a long shot.
Yeah,
but we didn't. So it was
that conversation. I mean, I've been asked not to do that again, but that version would be kind of hard to sit through. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we won't come back to your country again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, they would have just completely just sit me on a boat.
Yeah, so you're banned from Spain. All right. Well, that story, kind of dovetails, into like point number 1. And it's something that I know that you hammer at our church with our team and with our musicians and kind of everybody up and down the audio and video food chain. And that is being aware of your equipment and knowing, in this case, you had you had power adapters and converters because of the power standards and stuff. But if you didn't know that, and other people on your team didn't, because they're not intimate with the equipment like that, it could have been much more disastrous than it was. Talk to us about the importance of knowing the stuff you have and your signal chain and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, in my years of working with churches across the board, one of the biggest problems we've seen is this lack of familiarity with our equipment. It's the concept of I come in on a Sunday morning, and whenever so let's say there's a sound check. I hope there's a sound check at your church, and say sound checks at service starting, and you have a sound check at 9:30, which we don't want. We want something much earlier than that, but I'm just giving an example. So you show up at 9:28, you walk in the room, you flip on some switches, and everyone's up, and here you go. Then you punch on some mics. They check. They bang on the keyboard to make sure it's coming through. Okay, we're good. And then we move on. You run sound for the service, and when that's over, you don't look at the soundboard again for the whole week. You don't think about it. You don't look at service orders, anything like that. You show up the next Sunday morning and you do the same thing. That is a huge mistake. Matt talked about this before, and we will again, because one of the most important things that we can learn in audio as a technician, and really in video as well, and that is we are operating an instrument in worship. And when we are operating that instrument, we have to do it with excellence. Psalm 33:3 tells us to play, right? And we think about those musicians who bless us every week with their gifts, whether they're playing piano or keyboard or trumpet, or they're singing or drums or whatever. And you just sit back and you go, wow, they're really good at that. Listen to them when they're not out in the forefront. Listen to them when they're in the background of what's going on. You're going to hear the same excellence in the background that you hear in the forefront. And that's because they are skillfully operating their instrument for the glory of God. What that means for us is that we should be practicing, preparing, and really becoming intimately familiar with the equipment we're operating. If I sit down at my guitar and I start playing, I don't stop and look at where my fingers are going and play, okay, there we are, I don't show up on Sunday morning and open up the song list for the first time. Oh, what key's this one in? No, I've practiced my instrument. I can close my eyes and play that guitar all day long. And when I show up, I've practiced. I've played through things. As a matter of fact, as an audio technician, you've probably gotten really frustrated when people show up and they're not ready and they aren't really getting into it because they're just buried in the music, just trying to stay with it. Don't be guilty of the same thing. Come in early, prep everything out, test everything you can before anybody else even asks about it. Run the service, come to practices, run the practices for your own practice. Learn your equipment so that you're not having to concentrate so hard on how it, and really pour yourself into it like Psalm 33 tells us, okay? To the glory of God, play skillfully on your instrument. That's one of the biggest mistakes I see, and it's something we have to fix in our hearts before we can fix it in our rooms.
That is exactly right. And that goes not just with like the audio equipment. You mentioned the instrumentalists and stuff. That goes with the video equipment, and that one of the things that one of our members keeps talking about is the need to know your signal chain, and you need to know what's coming from what and going to what. And when you practice with your equipment, hopefully you're part of the setup and building of your equipment, of your setup, because you want to get your hands dirty, get in there. That's like the best way to know what is going on. If you just walk in and you see a soundboard and you see a rack full of hardware and a bunch of cables going places, and there's this box up there with flashy lights on it on the stage and stuff, and you have a general idea of what's what and all that. But if you haven't been the one that's put it together, then you don't know it as intimately. Because when you build it out, when you're putting things, when you're wiring things, when you're doing all this, what happens is you run into problems. You run into something is not working, and you have to start tracing back what is not working. We did this when we were setting up our control room at the church. We have we in the balcony, in the center of our balcony, we have our media booth, and we've had everything set up in there. And then we took the video, or about half of the video, the broadcast related stuff and the broadcast audio, and moved that into a room right behind the media booth. We have an office up there, which is awesome. Turned it into our control room. When we were taking care of setting up our cameras had been in the media booth with us. They had been one on the right, one on the desk in the middle. And then we didn't have anything else like down on the floor or anything. And we decided we're going to move that down. And right underneath the media booth, we were able to take a couple of pews out, build a little platform, and set up our cameras. Now, we had to get the wires up there. And I remember when we were running these heavy gauge HDMI cables up up through the ceiling and then underneath the booth, and there's joists and false doors and all kinds of crazy stuff, and getting all that. We still had problems with it, but because we were the ones that were doing it, we were able to easily trace down and say, yep, it was that exact thing. We know exactly which one it is, where it is, what the problem is, how to fix it and stuff. So knowing your equipment is the most important thing to getting the proper sound, the proper output from your equipment, which then causes less distractions for your audience, whether it's the one in the house or whether it's the one right here on the live stream like you guys are with us. So, Curtis, what would you say is the second biggest mistake that people are doing that they may not even really realize?
Yeah, for me, one of the main things that I've run into is just the understanding of gain and what it means and what it's for.
So what does gain mean?
So our gain, when I explain signal flow, this is a whole different thing, and we may go into this in a different video, but our soundboard basically has a series of floodgates for sound and reservoirs. Okay, so we've got the keyboard coming into a channel, and it's like a reservoir of sound, and we get to open and close a floodgate to see how much we're letting in, and then we can open and close the next floodgate to say how much we're going to let through to the mains or to monitors or whatever. So the gain is your first floodgate. Now, some boards, they're getting pretty unified now, but it used to be you would see gain, trim, or sensitivity, depending on who manufactured your board. And while technically gain and trim aren't exactly the same thing, they do have the same effect. And so when we look at our gain, that is how much am I letting into this channel to control. If I let too much in, then I overrun all the other floodgate distortion. If I don't let enough in, I'm having to crank the floodgates to be able to get enough through, to get a trickle through, because I just haven't opened the floodgates before enough. And so that's a signal flow conversation. But gain is the one thing that you can change that will blow your whole sound system up in 1 second, because you're changing multiple things when you change your gain, not just one thing. Let me explain why. So if you have a fader on your board and you've turned it up to a certain level, and you just feel like I'm not getting enough, so I'm going to turn up the gain. Okay, you turn up the gain, you get more coming through that channel, but you've also increased the gain in every monitor. So now they're getting, the monitor mix is completely changed. You're sending a new level possibly to your stream, depending on how you're set up. You're sending new levels possibly to your in-ears. So everybody's mix has just radically changed, and you've increased the sensitivity of that instrument. So if it's a microphone, for instance, you're increasing your opportunity for exponentially in a live setting where you don't have real control anymore. There's too many other things going on. So gain is not something we want to adjust live. Gain is something we want to adjust in our pre-service preparation. It's something we want to set for the instrument that it is, and so that it's good and it's usable and it's at the right level. Because what happens, well, say you have a pulpit microphone. You poor soul, I'm sorry you have a pulpit microphone. They're the worst. I understand. I feel your pain. But if you have a microphone and the pastor gets up there and talks and he uses a big voice, and then little old lady Sue May gets up there and she starts talking about the ladies, and you can't hear her, and so I'm going to turn up the gain. Well, you're turning up a very sensitive condenser phone with a large pattern. Your chance of getting feedback just skyrocketed. Sometimes we don't have a choice, I understand, but adjusting the gain live is a no-no. Don't do it. Bad. Red light. Bad things happen. You'll regret it. Everyone on stage will hate you when you adjust the gain live. Everybody downline from you in your stream mix will hate you for changing the gain live, because you mess everything up. So make sure you set your gain right first, which is easy. You use your PFL button or your solo button to help you do that. Set it by the meter, not by the ear. Watch the meter on your board. PFL, just that channel, or solo, that one channel, and watch the meter on your board, okay? If it's a keyboard, tell them make sure they play a song they're actually playing in service, not just piddling around. Get them to play, and you want to be peeking out in the yellows, not the reds, but you don't want to be living in the greens, okay? If you're hitting right in the mid of those yellows, then it means when they really bang on it, you'll have a little headroom, but when they get really soft, you'll have enough to push through. Same thing's true for a vocalist. Get your vocalist to sing into their mic, not talk into their mic, okay? Because if they talk into it, you know how it is. People who talk loud sing soft. People who talk soft sing loud. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, make sure that you really get them to sing into it. That's really, really important, so that you can get that gain set right. And it is so important to do it. And remember that in churches, we set it more to the instrument, less to the individual, okay? That mic may get used by more than one person, even in a single service. So make sure the mic is set to where it has some low space, so that you can handle someone who's a little louder or a little softer on the same mic, unless it's a dedicated mic.
Right, and you have to remember that that someone who is singing and who has experience working a handheld mic and stuff is going to self-modulate. So they are going to get out of their mic, pull their mic in a little bit as they go. When they start getting really loud, I mean, our worship pastor, Jason, he's an opera singer, okay? I mean, we joke about it, but the reality is that he breaks microphones because of the pressure of his voice. I mean, he breaks the diaphragms on there. So he will modulate. He will, when he starts singing kind of quietly and stuff, he pulls it in closer. When he starts getting really loud, he pulls it back. So you have to keep that in mind as well. And when you set the gain proper, Curtis, when you get it, when it's properly set for the piece of equipment that it is and the person who is going to be using it in that instance, or if it's going to be shared amongst two or three, you've kind of got an average between those three. Then with your slider, that's where your give and take is, right? That you've got the play to push it on the slider up into the red, but it's really only getting into the yellow in reality, right? But even though it feels like you would be pushing it way too hard, what you don't want is you don't want to have it all the way up and your gain has been set down so low that you have no place to go, right?
Yeah, in on a technical side, there's the concept of unity gain that's taught, and it's saying that you should set your faders all at unity and then set your gain. That is not a good practice, guys. I understand there are times in a studio setting where you want that kind of thing, but in a live setting, you want to make sure that your gain is giving you the maximum amount of quality of sound coming through there. Your gain, if you ever get that air noise that's coming through, a lot of times that's because somewhere along the line your gain staging is wrong, and that's a whole other conversation. If you've got a guitar and he's got a processor and then there's a box and all these kinds of things, there's gain staging is what they call it. But this is the gain on your board specifically that we're talking about, and making sure. Now, if you have, for instance, someone who has a huge voice like our worship guy does, okay? He has a big voice. I have a big voice. They don't change the gain a lot between the two of us, even though not a lot more than I do. He really does. It's still pretty similar, but when someone else grabs his mic, they have to adjust the gain. So like his mic really needs to be used by him. Our pastor uses it sometimes if he's not preaching that day, but he speaks up and that kind of thing. So sometimes you do have specific channels that you're like, this is a real specific gain kind of situation. Let's block this one out so we don't have to change it. And it is great to do that with especially your mic if you can. It's best if the worship leader is the only one who uses the worship leader mic, because then you're not adjusting things. That really got to come through. And that's why I'm also a big fan of, if your pastor, say, has a headworn mic, wireless pack, if you can say, you can save his channel in case there's ever a guest preacher or something, assuming you're on a digital console, or even have a secondary microphone that's just for guest speakers, so the pastor's mic never gets messed with. Because as soon as we mess with it, then it's hard to ever get it back the way we wanted it before. And gain is the beginning. That's the first step to every setup. We got to have our gain established, and we need to be able to live with that throughout an entire live service and not make any changes.
Yeah, and having a digital board, it's awesome because you can save all these different setups and stuff. I know at our church we do have like a guest speaker that we can load in and then make changes to for that one instant. We have certain people that we have a couple of our members that have been in the pastorate, and so they kind of, the standards that we go to when our pastor's out of town, we'll have Bart. He used to be our pastor, and so he'll come up. Bart has a totally different voice. I mean, you talk about from one extreme to the other, and when you have these two people using the same microphones or going back and forth between the same handhelds, Bart's Jared's voice is more up here like this. It has a higher end to it and not as much of a low end, and then Bart has like no really high register whatsoever and stuff. So we end up with doing all kinds of like major EQing when it comes to that. So I love the idea of being able to do this. Curtis, we're going to have to do we're going to have to do like some tutorials, I think, where we go through some of these basics like gain, like getting rid of feedback, like how to, that the EQ is your friend and can solve tons of problems. I know I watched you work magic once with an EQ, and we got it where the pastor with a lapel mic was able to walk a good 2/3 off the stage into the audience and communicate and pace around without any feedback, even when whether he was talking quietly and just like say reading scripture, or whether he was thundering as he was walking. There was like no feedback, and that was just an EQ thing. So we're folks, we're gonna turn Curtis loose and let him go through like some basic stuff and some troubleshooting. I think one of these days. It's extremely cool. By the way, speaking of extremely cool, I want to tell you guys that this episode is made possible by Restream. Restream, guys, if you don't know about it, it is like one of the best tools out there. It's something that I've been using for, well, with church media creators and the previous incarnations, church media guys, Church Training Academy, these live shows and stuff have been used using Restream. So I want to go back to probably 2016, 2017, something like that. We've been using them at our church for well over 5 years. Here's the situation. A lot of people ask, how can I stream to multiple platforms? Okay. For example, today I am streaming to YouTube and I'm streaming to our Facebook page. So I've got 2 places. Now, when you are streaming to multiple platforms, it takes overhead, okay, which means that your computer is going to be working extra hard for every single stream that gets sent out, okay? So right now I'm using vMix, okay? That is my broadcast software, and I've got multiple cameras coming in. I've got multiple video overlays, things like that. In fact, here's one right there. I've got overlays coming in. I've got things that are going to be coming in on the screen. I've got things coming in from other computers. You do that at your church. You have multiple cameras. You have the Pro Presenter feed. You may have 2 or 3 feeds coming from Pro Presenter, depending on what you need. All of that is going to be using up your memory, your CPU, and your GPU. Now, if you want to encode the stream for going up to a platform, you then have to use more of the CPU and GPU and memory to do that. So that's just for one stream. So what happens when you want to go to YouTube and Facebook? You now have 2 streaming sessions coming out, and your overhead gets heavier and your system starts to bog down. You don't have to worry about that with Restream. They've got over 30 different platforms that you can go to. And if they don't have a specific platform that you're looking for, like a homegrown platform that you use, you've got a friend who built a streaming server that you want to broadcast through. Well, guess what? You can use a RTMP stream. So they've got just like an open bucket that you put in the information that you need to, and they can add it to there. It is extremely cool. It is very affordable and extremely powerful. You send them one stream, and they turn around and duplicate it as many times as they need to get it out to every single one of the platforms that you're using. And that lets you then start serving the audience that's on that platform, building engagement, building your audience, and in our case, leveraging the technology, amplifying the gospel, and inspiring change in people's hearts. So go to getrestream.com. You'll get a $10 credit when you sign up. It is awesome. Like I said, I've been using it with 2 live streams for years. I love it. It's wonderful. You cannot go wrong if you go with Restream. Go to getrestream.com. You'll thank me. Hey, Mr. Curtis, let's talk about... Oops, I went to the wrong thing. I'm hitting buttons. I'm just sticking buttons left and right. I'm going 2 different places. There we go. All right. So I've got a little switcher here, and then I got the switcher here. I'm a switching. You can call me Captain Switch. That's what I want.
You're just having way too much fun over there pushing buttons.
I know, it's awesome. Okay, so Restream, seriously, it's awesome. Curtis.
Yeah, let me say something about that too.
Please.
Restream, I've interacted with it quite a bit for our church, and oh guys, it was huge when we were going into COVID, and we had YouTube, we had Facebook, we had all these different things going on. It was so great to be able to just go from one spot and get it all done. And it's a very effective tool, and it's something that allows you to stream so many places at once. There's really nothing else like it, and you really should consider it for your live streams. But also, it's good for just getting things up and going at other times. You can schedule things with it. It's pretty versatile. So strongly encourage you to have a look at it for sure.
One of the things that I didn't mention in the read was that they actually have a studio. So right now, what you and I are doing is we're using vMix, and we are sending it into them from a stream. They have a connection. We connect to it. Boom. But if you are remote, if you're doing something else, and I liken it to if I was in a hotel room, right, and I was using my laptop, and you were at home, and you're not going to engineer the stream, I'm going to engineer the stream. I may want to just use Restream, and I'll use my webcam. That's going to be the source. I can load up our graphics. I can bring you in, and then we could be doing this back and forth and stuff. It's really cool. So getrestream.com. Fantastic. You'll thank me. So Curtis, in our notes for the biggest mistake that one of the biggest mistakes that people are making, you put pay attention. So basically what you're saying is that one of the biggest mistakes is that people just flat don't pay attention to what they're doing. Their eyes glaze over, they fall asleep, things like that.
Yeah, and it actually ties into number 1 that we talked about. It starts with knowing your equipment. If you don't know your equipment, you can't pay attention. I also liken this very much to a musician. So there's a statement out there that I actually disagree with, and it is that if you're on the worship team, you need to find other times in the week to worship, because on Sunday morning you're playing music and you're focusing, and so you're not worshiping. I disagree with that very strongly. I do understand that on Sunday morning, if you're on the worship team, There are times when you may not be able to focus on worship in the same way because you're thinking of the technical transitions and things like that.
Yep.
You may not be able to just at times. And I understand that. And so I'm not saying that that's completely untrue, that you shouldn't be finding other times to worship, which is actually your practice time, by the way. That should be an act of worship too. Anyway, but as we kind of get into this, the concept that I always taught my musicians was be familiar enough with your music that you can worship, that you don't have to just stare at the page and just focus in on the music so that you know exactly where everything is right, but instead be familiar enough with the music that you can actually reflect on what God's doing, that you can actually focus on what the music is saying and things like that, so you can worship. The same thing is true from an audio standpoint. If you don't know your gear, you can't worship during that time. You can't pay attention to what's going on. Your eyes are down. You don't know what's going on the stage because you're trying to find, where's that monitor, where's the high, where's this, where's that, which channel are they on, which page am I on, all that kind of stuff. And that factors in a huge way, because our attention must be focused on the stage, because that's where everything is happening. That's where the worship leader is singing and they move weird and they've hit the mic stand and it's starting to fall over and we need to mute that mic. Or that's where the pastor feels led to come up and pray and grabs a mic from the edge of the stage that's not in use, and they expect that sucker to be on.
Yep.
When they start praying. We want to make sure we unmute them and we're ready to go. Being on your mutes is so key for this thing. You've got to be eyes up, fingers down, ready to go, ready to mute and unmute things, ready to be able to watch and realize, oh, the guitar player seems to be having a problem. He's looking at me like, because he's got a cable problem. He's going to swap his cable out or whatever. We're going to hear a huge pop. We need to be aware that the drummer just threw a stick. It matters, okay? Drummers throw sticks all the time, by the way, or they break sticks. We need to know that affects the sound of what's going on. He's moving around. He's trying to grab something. Is he about to bump that microphone? There's all kinds of things happening on your stage. And when our eyes are down and not up, it will kill everybody in the room. And it's true not just if you're running the live audio board, but if you're running your stream board, the same thing is true. You've got to know what's going on. You can't be blind. We can't be internet. We can't believe. One of my favorite stories ever from many years ago is Sunday night church. We would have youth run our computer, our video computer, so the slides on the screen. And that was a way for them to start to get engaged in our AV ministry. And we had this one young lady who was really good at it. She was really dedicated. She was up there every week. Everybody in church knew her. She's a great young lady. And we had our screens, and then we had a back screen, a confidence monitor, and you had a switch that you could turn the front screens, but actually you never turned off the confidence monitor. And so the pastor was up there preaching. He never used slides on Sunday night. So he's up there preaching, and he finally just stops in the middle of his message, and he says, honey, will you please just move that 5 over there? It's driving me crazy. She's been playing solitaire his whole message, and he just couldn't end that she wouldn't move that 5 over because it would give her a whole line. She filled it in. It would have been great. And he finally just really had to help her out. Of course, played solitaire during the service again, but she shouldn't have been playing solitaire. She should have been tuned in and paying attention. It was one of the greatest moments. And
that's awesome.
If she was really tuned in and paying attention, then she wouldn't be playing solitaire. And I understand we're multitaskers. I understand we're on our phones or whatever. If you're in the booth, you're running audio, you've got a lot happening. Be there. Be there in that moment.
Yeah.
Be focused, just like the person playing the keyboard is focused, okay? Be focused, just like you're expecting the drummer to be focused on if they've got the click and they're going to get that intro. Be focused in that way. And it's hard because, unlike the people on stage, if you're doing your job right, you're not super active. You shouldn't be moving things constantly. If you are, you're not being an invisible sound man. Everybody knows you're there.
Right.
Everything next, and we should be making small adjustments. But boy, it only takes a second of looking away for everything to fall apart on your stage. And you've got to be ready to respond to that at a moment's notice. Eyes on the stage means you got to know your gear, you got to be able to put your hands on stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and so that you're not having to look at it all the time, but also you need to be focused on what's happening on that stage all the time, aware constantly at what's happening, and that's part of the job.
In the broadcast booth, or excuse me, yeah, in the broadcast room, in the control room, this is something that I deal with, especially with people that are newer to mixing the audio. One of the things that we did, you've been talking in general and with front of house kind of stuff, right? Especially being right there and being able to see the stage and all that. In the broadcast booth, you can't necessarily see the stage. Now, originally, we were all standing right there, all shoulder to shoulder, and I could see what was going on. I could see that someone was walking up and make sure that there would be a camera to cut to and stuff like that. But in the broadcast booth, in the control room, we don't necessarily have that. So what we did was we set up we set up monitors, okay? The next monitor we're going to do I'll tell you is even cooler. But what we did is at the broadcast seat where I am, and we're running vMix. I've got the monitor that I'm working on, like this monitor that's sitting right here in front of me. But then up on the wall, right above it, I've got my program feed and I've got my multicam feed. The multicam feed is basically showing me cam 1, cam 2, cam 3, so I could see what's going on. So I can look and say, I need to move cam 2 into position, and then I can take it. I've got these previews available to me, right? It's awesome. So what we did, though, was we then duplicated those screens right above the audio workstation. So our audio workstation has a nice curved monitor that's right there at eye level. It is perfect. You are looking straight ahead at, like, I don't know, a million tracks, and they can grab tracks and pull them down and up and fade them, do all sorts of add compression, take away compression, add reverb, they got it all right there. But if they look up right above where it is, they can see the multicam monitor and they can see the program monitor. So they're able to see what's happening on the stage. And it's important that they're working here with their sliders as well as keeping on what's going on. Perfect example is when our worship pastor starts working in a song and he gets to a certain point and he pulls the mic down, because and that's a symbol to us as audio engineers. That's a symbol to make sure that the microphones in the audience are up. Okay. Now, when you're in the front of house, when you're doing this for a live mix with a room full of people, and you hear them all singing, they're hearing each other. They're standing next to each other. It doesn't need a whole lot of reinforcement. He pulls it down. The people that are helping him, the praise team folks, they pull their mics down, and everybody is just sort of singing together in unison, and it works really well in the room. So if the person who's doing the front of house mixing pulls up the audience mics or doesn't, it really doesn't matter, because that moment is happening with people all surrounding each other. When you're in the broadcast, it goes from him singing to there was not a problem with my audio, you just can't hear it. That's the thing. That's it. All of a sudden, it's just you hear music and it's dead, right? So the person who's mixing audio needs to get their finger on that fader, and we keep ours like on every page, where you can just like grab it real quick and push it up and pull it down as needed. It's something that has to happen, and you have to realize it's happening. And if you can't see it, like I said, we got the program, we got the preview monitors. You can check those cameras and see what's going on. But that's how important that paying attention is. If you're just sitting there because everything is all set and everybody's worked and nothing's really changed, and all of a sudden you're scrambling to find the audience mic, the people online, they're hearing music and going, why isn't anybody singing? What's wrong? What's going on there? And you have taken them out of that moment. You have caused a distraction, and that's what we don't want to do. We don't want to cause a distraction. We want to enable the people, whether they're in the room or whether they're online and watching through their phone, or have it, playing through their stereo in their car as they're driving on vacation or something like that. We want to make sure that we are not distracting them. We are giving them exactly what they need to see and exactly what they need to hear in those exact moments. So focus. It's like It's like Dave Ramsey says, with that gazelle intensity, you just focus on everything. You're constantly changing, and it does get tiring and stuff. But we're not doing this to relax. We're doing this to serve folks and to amplify the gospel, right, Curtis?
Absolutely. And it's important that we're ready for those kinds of things. But that brings us to kind of the final step that we're talking about today, the biggest mistake that I've seen, and that is attitude. Attitude is the number one problem I see between us as audio technicians and the stage. There is always this competitive nature that takes place, almost like an us and them mentality. And it is wrong and it is destructive to what God's trying to do in the worship ministry of your church. And I've run into it over and over and over. I remember years ago, I went to a church and they were struggling with their sound. They had lots of problems. They had a huge worship team with some orchestral pieces, horns, different things like that. It was a very challenging room. And I was in the back and they were running a full rehearsal for me so that I could get the feel of everything going on. And it was just deafeningly loud. It was brutal. The mix was terrible. And was just shaking his head. And I reached over and I remember I pulled down the main fader and it didn't change the room volume because everything was pushing through floor wedges, basically 4 different floor wedge mixes on the stage. And I said, you know, do you realize that your mains are basically not impacting your room? He said, yeah, it's just so loud. It's so loud. It's just, I don't know what to do about it. So I went up to the stage and I'm standing next to one of the vocalists and she's singing and I look at her and I say, does that feel a little loud to you? I mean, it's like ear splitting. And she goes, oh, it's just terrible. It's just so loud. It's just almost unbearable every week. And I thought, wait a second.
Every week?
We both just had the same complaint. You know what I mean? What's going on here? And what it was they were struggling with their stage mix. They couldn't hear themselves, so they asked for more. So he turns it up, and they ask for more, and he turns it up. He thinks they want it louder when all they really wanted to be able to do is hear themselves. But what happened was it turned into a competition, which meant everybody was unhappy, and the church was losing in the process. And they were frustrated with the sound man. The sound man was frustrated with them. And the truth is, it was just a lack of humility and conversation. Philippians 2:3 says, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility more significant than yourselves. Did you catch that? In humility, count others more significant than yourself. If you're in the booth and you say, well, these people don't think what I do is important. They don't value me. Whatever. Who cares? God's called you to a work and you their needs as more significant than your preferences or desires. But that also means you communicate with them about concerns. If they say, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? And you say, well, I'm really not sure I can offer that, and this is why. Then they may say, oh, well, no, we want it this way. And you're like, oh, I can do that. And communicate, but treat people with value and importance. Don't ever get in an argument with them. It never works. It never helps. Okay? Do what you can do with your equipment. We also fall under authority. We all fall under authority. In most churches, you're falling under the authority of your worship leader, worship pastor, worship minister, music minister, whatever you call that position. And they may ask for something that you just find technically unwise. It's okay for you to look at them and say, hey, this could be the result. And they say, well, okay, but this is how we want to do it. Then you just say, great. Because why? Because we're going to treat them as more significant than ourselves. And we're going to look for the right time to sit down and have a conversation if we're struggling with something specific. Say the volume of somebody's mic on a floor wedge, if you've got floor wedges on your stage. Go sit down with the vocalist and say, hey, I'm really struggling with mixing you well out in the room because there's so much of you coming through that floor monitor. Do you think that there's a way for us to bring everything down or bring you down in that to kind of balance that out so that I can really get you through the mains to get the quality of your voice to come through well? Or maybe they're not holding their microphone right. Major problem. Help them understand. The further they get away from their mic, their quality of their voice is diminished.
Yep.
Okay, the closer they get to it, the more you have to work with.
Right.
Everybody wants to sound better, so that encourages them to get closer. But really be patient and loving and put others ahead of yourselves. Your attitude makes all the difference in the world from the get-go. As soon as you get started, what's your attitude? Oh, they're late. They're not set up. Oh, they didn't bring their... Who cares? Fine, they're late. They didn't show up on time. They didn't bring their cable. You know what? That's why you're there. You're there to make sure they have a working cable. You're there to make sure they have the tools they need. If they're going to be late, you can't help that. That's not your problem. Okay? You need to make sure that you have an attitude of loving ministry toward those whom you're ministering to on your team and in your church. It will change the way your team interacts with you and everybody else in your booth if you bring that kind of attitude.
Attitude is everything. That is awesome. The focus on the attitude that you have, right, where you're trying to serve others, will lead to, backwards recursively to number 3, which is your focus. So that if you're trying to serve others, you're going to want to make sure that you are serving them and you're giving them what you need. And it's one of the things that people have complained. I don't know if that's the right word. They bring it up. We discuss it in live streams past, different iterations of the show. One of the things, and especially in our mastermind calls, people talk about this almost this attitude, and you've seen it at you've been in churches where that attitude has been there. I've seen it in churches as well. The attitude is an us versus them type of an attitude, where you've got the media team and you've got the people on the stage. We know we know what we're doing. I know how to adjust gain. I know how to EQ. If you would quit standing on the wedge, and if you would take a half step back and stuff, then we wouldn't have feedback. I know what I'm doing. I'm watching you make all these mistakes. You don't know what you're doing. You're an amateur. I'm a professional. All that kind of attitude, comes through. And we have to remember, and this is one of the things that I absolutely love about our worship pastor, is that, he came in view of a call. He came in, he talked, he addressed the church like in a luncheon, just kind of here's my philosophy, here's what I think my job is, my calling, and we kind of got to know him and stuff. And then, if you remember, Curtis, he got with everyone that had anything to do with media and with the choir and the musicians and the orchestra and all that sort of stuff, and we all came together and he talked. And one of the things that he said, like one of the very first things, is we are the worship team. So he, as the worship leader, you as someone who's filling in on a guitar or standing next to him doing background vocals, or playing on an instrument, are part of the worship team. Lisa, who runs our manned camera on the platform, is part of the worship team. Me in the back room switching cameras is part of the worship team. The guy who's running sound for front of house is part of the worship team. The person who's running Pro Presenter is part of the worship team. That's the media team, and we're the worship team. We are the worship team, and we all have one job, one goal, which is to create an atmosphere of worship for the people that are in the room and give them the least amount of distractions, to take away pops and hisses and hum and movement, unnecessary movement, all this kind of stuff. Take all this sort of stuff away from them so that they can focus on hearing from the Holy Spirit through music, through the lyrics, through the things that they're saying, the responsive readings, through the visuals that are on the screens, from, if they're doing this remotely, from the images that we're pushing through on the live stream, which camera angles we're choosing, which visuals we're showing, whether we bring up a lower third or not. All of that sort of stuff is creating an atmosphere of worship, and later an atmosphere of learning, because of the sermon or Bible study or whatever it is that we're doing. we're all part of that, and so we have to work in concert. And like you said, so much of it comes down to communication. The case you gave where they kept bringing the wedges up and stuff, it wasn't the overall sound. She just wanted to hear more of her voice, and that is something as simple as the person at the soundboard saying, "Do you want more music, more everything, or more of you?" And then she could say, "More of me," and we wouldn't have to go through weeks of frustration and all that. Okay, I turned the little knob, more of her, and now she's happy. She can hear herself, and all that's great. Communication, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Communicating helps with all these kinds of things, but the key is always have the attitude of being the solution,
Mm.
not the problem. Okay? Always be the solution. Be the one bringing solutions to the problems. And when people shoot down your solutions, instead of getting mad and saying, "Oh, they don't like me," then just come up with a new solution or consider somebody else's solution that you can apply instead of you're the only one who can have the ideas. But make sure you focus on being a good team member and honestly, just a good believer who's leading out in ministry and blessing the lives of those around him. And that is what we want to do as we work to amplify the gospel as church media creators. Thanks for joining us today. There's probably some other things we have for you. As a matter of fact, this video, it'd probably help you as you go through the process of learning how to be a better technician, how to be a better media creator, and going out and amplifying the gospel.